There is a mistake that silently destroys more relationships than rejection ever could. It isn't being ignored. It is continuing to chase someone after they have already shown you that your presence no longer matters to them. Most people believe that more effort will eventually change another person's mind. They believe one more message, one more apology, one more attempt to explain themselves will finally make the other person care. But human psychology rarely rewards the person who keeps chasing. More often, it rewards the person who knows when to stop. The moment someone repeatedly ignores you, they are communicating something, not always with words, but with actions. And actions have always been the most honest language human beings speak. If someone truly wants you in their life, they create opportunities to talk to you, they make time, they respond, they invest effort. But when every conversation depends on you, every message begins with you, every meeting happens because you planned it, you are no longer building a relationship, you are maintaining an illusion. The hardest part is that most people refuse to accept this reality. Instead, they convince themselves that the other person is simply busy, stressed, confused, not ready. They create endless excuses because accepting the truth feels too painful. But the longer you chase, the more expensive that truth becomes. Because every message you send without receiving the same effort back quietly changes the balance of power. Imagine pulling a rope. At first, both people are holding it. There is balance, there is resistance, but then one person lets go. Instead of releasing the rope yourself, you continue pulling alone. What happens? You don't move closer to them. You simply exhaust yourself. That is exactly what chasing someone who ignores you feels like. You are fighting against empty space. And empty space never fights back. Human psychology notices this immediately. When someone realizes you continue returning, no matter how little attention they give, something changes inside their mind. Your attention no longer feels valuable. It feels guaranteed. And guaranteed attention slowly loses emotional impact. People naturally value what they could lose, not what they believe will always remain. This is why chasing almost never creates attraction. It creates certainty, and certainty removes curiosity. The other person stops wondering whether you will be there tomorrow because your actions have already answered that question. No matter what I do, they'll come back. That belief is dangerous, not because it makes someone evil, but because it removes the motivation to appreciate you. The greatest psychological mistake is believing that more effort fixes one-sided relationships. In reality, more effort often hides the problem instead of solving it. As long as you keep chasing, the other person never has to ask themselves an important question. What if they stop? Because in their mind, you never will. This is why walking away feels so frightening, not because you lose someone, but because you are forced to face a painful possibility. What if they never come after you? Most people avoid discovering that answer, so they continue chasing, not because the relationship is healthy, but because uncertainty feels unbearable. Yet uncertainty is exactly where freedom begins. The moment you stop sending the extra message, stop making the extra call, stop forcing another conversation, you finally give the relationship its first honest test. Now the responsibility is no longer yours alone. Now the other person has a choice. They can reach out or they can remain silent. Either way, you finally receive the truth, and truth is always more valuable than false hope. There is another reason you must stop chasing people who ignore you. Every moment spent seeking attention from someone who has already withdrawn is a moment stolen from your own life. While you wait for one reply, your goals wait, your confidence weakens, your peace disappears, your future stands still. One person becomes the center of your emotional world, even though you are barely a thought in theirs. That is the highest price of chasing. It convinces you to abandon yourself while trying to keep someone else. Power begins returning the moment you choose differently, not when they text you, not when they apologize, but when you decide your self-respect is more important than their temporary attention. You stop checking your phone every few minutes. You stop inventing excuses for their silence. You stop confusing inconsistency with interest. Instead, you invest your energy where it can actually grow your purpose, your discipline, your future. Ironically, this is often the exact moment people begin noticing your absence, not because you were trying to make them miss you, but because you finally stopped making it easy for them to take you for granted. Remember, stopping the chase is not about punishing someone who ignored you. It is about refusing to punish yourself any longer, because the person who truly values you will never require you to beg for their attention. And the moment you stop chasing those who repeatedly ignore you, you stop losing yourself in the process and quietly become someone whose attention must finally be earned. There is a strange pattern that repeats itself in almost every relationship. The moment you stop chasing someone who has been ignoring you, something unexpected begins to happen. The silence that once made you anxious suddenly becomes their problem instead of yours. Why? Because human psychology is built around one powerful principle. People rarely recognize the value of something while they believe it will always be there. They recognize its value only when they realize they might lose it. This is why chasing often produces the opposite of what you want. The more available you become, the less your attention feels special. The more you keep proving your loyalty, the less effort the other person feels they need to make, not because they planned it, but because the human mind naturally adapts to certainty. Imagine receiving a gift every single day. At first, you feel grateful, excited, even surprised. But after weeks, the excitement begins fading. Eventually, you expect the gift to arrive. And one day, if it doesn't, that is the moment you finally notice its value. Attention works exactly the same way. As long as someone knows you will always text first, always return after being ignored, your attention becomes predictable. And predictable things rarely create appreciation. This is why stopping the chase changes everything, not because silence is magical, but because it interrupts certainty. The person who ignored you suddenly experiences something unfamiliar. Your message never arrives, your call never comes, your constant reassurance disappears. For the first time, they are forced to experience your absence instead of taking your presence for granted. That is where psychology quietly begins to work. The human brain pays more attention to loss than comfort. It notices what disappears far more than what remains. As long as you kept chasing, there was nothing to think about. You were always there. But now, something has changed. Questions begin appearing. Why did they suddenly stop? Did they finally move on? Have I lost someone who genuinely cared? Notice something important. These questions were never created by another message. They were created by the absence of one. This is why chasing rarely creates curiosity. It answers every question before anyone has the chance to ask. Stopping the chase allows reality to speak louder than effort. Many people are afraid of this moment. They believe that if they stop reaching out, the other person will disappear forever. But ask yourself something. If a relationship only survives because you refuse to stop chasing, was it ever balanced to begin with? Real relationships do not depend on one person carrying all the emotional weight. Real relationships survive because both people choose each other every single time. When you continue chasing someone who repeatedly ignores you, you protect them from experiencing the consequences of their own indifference. They never have to wonder what life feels like without your support, without your attention, without your presence, because you never give them the opportunity. That is why they continue taking you for granted. Not because they hate you, but because your availability has become normal. The moment that normal disappears, everything changes. Now, the relationship faces its first honest test. If they truly value you, they will notice the silence, not because you are playing games, but because your absence reveals what your constant presence was hiding. If they never reach out, then you receive something even more valuable than another conversation. You receive clarity, and clarity saves years of emotional exhaustion. There is another lesson hidden inside this principle. The purpose of stopping the chase is not to make someone miss you. If that becomes your goal, you are still emotionally attached to their reaction. You are still allowing your happiness to depend on what they do next. True psychological strength begins when you stop chasing, not because you expect them to return, but because you finally accept that your self-respect is worth more than uncertain attention. That decision changes your entire mindset. Instead of asking, how can I make them value me? You begin asking, why am I investing so much energy in someone who refuses to value me? That single question transforms everything because it redirects your attention from changing another person to protecting yourself. Your confidence slowly returns, your peace returns, your standards return. And for the first time in a long time, you stop waiting for someone else's message to decide whether today will be a good day. Ironically, this quiet transformation is often what people notice the most, not because you tried to become mysterious, but because you finally became unavailable to those who only appreciated you when it was convenient. Remember, you cannot force someone to recognize your value, but you can stop making it easy for them to ignore it. Because the moment you stop chasing people who repeatedly overlook your worth, you give them the chance to realize what they lost. And more importantly, you give yourself the chance to discover what you truly deserve. There is one response that completely changes the balance of power when someone ignores you. It isn't sending a longer message, it isn't demanding an explanation, and it certainly isn't trying harder to prove your worth. The strongest response is doing something most people find almost impossible, refusing to reward someone's indifference with more of your attention. Because the moment you continue chasing a person who keeps ignoring you, you teach them that your attention has no conditions, and anything given without limits is rarely respected. Think about how most people react after being ignored. The first message receives no reply, so they send another horse pass, still nothing. Then comes another text, another call, another excuse. They tell themselves, maybe they're busy, maybe they forgot, maybe I should try one more time. Without realizing it, every new attempt sends a silent message. No matter how you treat me, I'll still be here. That message is far more powerful than any words you actually type. Human psychology pays close attention to patterns. When someone discovers they can ignore you without consequences, that behavior slowly becomes normal. Not because they consciously decide to disrespect you, but because your actions have removed the need for them to make any effort. Why would someone chase what keeps chasing them? That is the uncomfortable truth most people never want to hear. Every extra step you take towards someone who keeps walking away makes it easier for them to continue walking. Imagine standing in front of a closed door. You knock once, no answer. You knock again, still nothing. Instead of leaving, you continue knocking for hours. At some point, the problem is no longer the closed door. The problem is your refusal to walk away from it. Life works the same way. Some people have already closed the emotional door, yet many continue standing outside, hoping persistence will create affection. But affection cannot be forced. Respect cannot be begged for. And genuine interest never needs endless reminders. This is where psychological control quietly changes hands. The moment you stop rewarding indifference, you interrupt a pattern that the other person had grown comfortable with. Suddenly, the expected message never arrives. The expected apology never comes. The expected pursuit disappears. For the first time, they experience uncertainty instead of certainty. The human mind immediately notices interrupted patterns. Why did they suddenly stop? Did they finally give up? Have they moved on? Was I wrong about them always coming back? Notice what happened. The questions are no longer inside your mind. They have moved into theirs, not because you manipulated them, but because you stopped participating in a one-sided cycle. That shift is incredibly important because chasing always keeps your attention trapped inside their world. Stopping the chase brings your attention back into your own. There is another psychological truth hidden here. Every time you continue chasing someone who ignores you, you slowly lower your own standards. At first, you tolerate delayed replies, then unanswered messages, then disrespect, then complete emotional inconsistency. Little by little, what once felt unacceptable begins feeling normal, not because your value changed, but because your fear of losing them became stronger than your respect for yourself. That is one of the greatest dangers of chasing. It doesn't just change how the other person sees you, it changes how you see yourself. Eventually, you begin believing that receiving the smallest amount of attention is enough. You celebrate breadcrumbs while ignoring the fact that you deserve consistency. Emotionally strong people refuse to live this way, not because they never care, but because they understand one principle. Attention should flow where respect already exists, not where respect has to be begged for. The moment someone repeatedly ignores them, they don't waste months trying to convince that person of their worth. They quietly step back, not with anger, not with revenge, but with dignity, because they know that chasing someone who has already chosen distance only creates more distance. Real confidence is measured by what you refuse to chase. You refuse to chase empty conversations, empty promises, empty effort, because you finally understand that the right people never require you to constantly prove why you deserve a place in their lives. In the end, the greatest psychological response to being ignored is not making someone regret losing you. It is refusing to lose yourself while trying to keep someone who has already stopped choosing you. And the moment you stop rewarding indifference with endless attention, you stop giving away your power, and quietly begin reclaiming the self-respect you should have never traded in the first place. There is one simple test that reveals the truth about every relationship. It doesn't require an argument. It doesn't require accusations. And it doesn't require you to ask someone whether they care about you. All it requires is that you stop chasing. Because the moment you stop being the only person keeping the connection alive, people reveal exactly how much they were willing to invest all along. That is why silence is not just the absence of words. In human psychology, silence is the moment when intentions become impossible to hide. Many people spend years believing they have strong relationships. They talk every day, they text constantly. They are always available, everything appears normal, but there is one question they never ask themselves. If I stopped reaching out today, would this relationship continue? Most people are afraid to discover the answer because deep inside, they already know the possibility they have been avoiding, that they may be the only reason the relationship still exists. Think about how many conversations begin because of you. You send the first message, you make the first call, you suggest meeting. You apologize first, you repair every disagreement. At first, it feels like kindness, but over time, kindness quietly responsibility. Then responsibility becomes expectation. Eventually, you become the engine pulling the entire relationship forward. The other person simply sits comfortably, knowing you will always make the next move. This is why chasing becomes so dangerous. It hides the truth. As long as you continue making all the effort, you never allow the other person to reveal their own. Imagine two people carrying a heavy table. As long as both are lifting, the weight feels balanced. But if one person secretly lets go, the other immediately feels the entire burden. Relationships work exactly the same way. The moment you stop carrying everything alone, the truth becomes impossible to ignore. Either the other person reaches down and helps, or they quietly walk away. Both outcomes give you something valuable, not another excuse, not another false promise, but clarity. And clarity is one of the greatest forms of psychological freedom. Many people fear silence because they think silence pushes people away. In reality, silence rarely pushes away someone who genuinely values you. It only removes the noise that was hiding their true level of effort. If someone truly wants you in their life, silence doesn't stop them. It motivates them. They notice your absence. They wonder if you're okay. They reach out not because you manipulated them, but because the relationship matters to them. Effort always follows value. On the other hand, someone who only enjoyed receiving your attention may never reach out at all, not because your silence hurt them, but because they were comfortable allowing you to do all the work. That truth can be painful, but it is far less painful than spending years chasing someone who never intended to walk beside you. There is another psychological reason why stepping back is so powerful. Human beings often confuse routine with connection. When someone hears from you every single day, your messages become part of their routine, not necessarily because they deeply appreciate them, but because they expect them. Expectation creates comfort. Comfort creates blindness. People stop recognizing what they receive every day. The moment that routine disappears, awareness returns. Now they notice what is missing. Now they recognize who is creating the connection all along. That is why your silence becomes a mirror. It reflects effort. If the other person values the relationship, they step toward you. If they don't, they remain exactly where they are. Either way, you stop living inside uncertainty. This is where self-respect begins replacing false hope. Instead asking, why don't they care? You begin asking, why have I been carrying a relationship alone? That question changes your life because it redirects your energy away from convincing someone to love you and toward building standards that protect your own peace. Emotionally mature people understand something most never learn. They never beg for consistency. They observe it. If someone wants to stay, their actions will always reveal it. If someone wants to leave, no amount of chasing will permanently change that decision. That is why silence becomes the most honest conversation two people can have. No excuses, no emotional speeches, no pressure, just actions. And actions never lie. Remember, the purpose of stepping back is not to test people out of pride. It is to stop lying to yourself about relationships that survive only because of your endless effort. Because the people who truly belong in your life will never force you to constantly prove your value. And the moment you stop chasing every connection that refuses to move towards you, you stop guessing who truly cares and finally allow their actions to give you the answer. There is a reason some people never chase those who ignore them. It is not because they have colder hearts. It is not because they never feel rejection. And it is certainly not because they never experience loneliness. The difference is much deeper than that. They have built a life that is too meaningful to pause for someone who has already chosen not to value their presence. When your purpose becomes stronger than your need for approval, chasing people no longer feels necessary. It begins to feel like a distraction from the life you are trying to build. Most people chase because they believe one person is the missing piece of their happiness. They convince themselves, if only this person replied, if only they understood me, if only they gave me another chance, everything would finally feel complete. But this belief creates a dangerous illusion. It places your emotional future into someone else's hands. Now your motivation depends on their attention, your confidence depends on their response, your peace depends on their decision. Without realizing it, you have given another person authority over a life that belongs only to you. This is exactly why chasing becomes so addictive. Every small reply feels like a reward, every moment of attention feels like hope, and every period of silence feels like emotional withdrawal. Your happiness begins rising and falling with someone else's behavior. That is not love. That is emotional dependence. And dependence always steals your freedom. Now imagine something different. Instead of spending hours wondering why someone ignored your message, you spend those hours improving yourself, learning a new skill, growing your career, building your health, strengthening your mind, creating goals that excite you. Little by little, your life becomes larger than one person's opinion. The same phone that once controlled your emotions now sits quietly while you focus on becoming someone you can respect. This is where everything begins to change, because people who have purpose move differently. They no longer wake up searching for validation. They wake up chasing progress. They don't spend every conversation trying to impress others. They spend their energy becoming impressive through their actions. That quiet shift changes how they see themselves. And eventually, it changes how the world sees them too. There is another psychological truth hiding here. People are naturally attracted to those who have direction, not because success makes someone valuable, but because purpose communicates emotional stability. Someone who knows where they are going cannot be easily pulled off their path by temporary rejection. Imagine two people after being ignored. The first spends the entire week checking social media, reading old conversations, wondering what went wrong, waiting for one message that may never arrive. The second feels disappointed too, but after acknowledging the feeling, they return to their work, their goals, their discipline, their future. One person allows rejection to become their identity. The other allows it to become a lesson. Months later, their lives look completely different, not because one avoided pain, but because one refused to build a life around it. This is why emotionally strong people rarely chase anyone. Their identity no longer depends on being chosen by a specific person. They have already chosen themselves. That doesn't make them arrogant, it makes them free. Freedom creates confidence, confidence creates peace. And peace is something no amount of outside attention can replace. Remember, building a meaningful life is not about pretending you don't care about relationships. Healthy relationships matter. Love matters. Katunching matters. But none of those things should ever require abandoning your own dreams just to keep someone else's attention. The moment you stop sacrificing your purpose for people who repeatedly ignore you, your standards begin rising. You stop accepting inconsistent effort. You stop explaining your worth. You stop trying to convince people to see your value, because your life itself becomes the proof. Ironically, this is often when people begin noticing you in ways they never did before, not because you became someone else, but because you stop revolving around those who never appreciated you. Your energy changes, your confidence changes, your conversations change. You no longer speak from desperation, you speak from direction. And direction has always been more attractive than neediness. In the end, the greatest way to stop chasing people who ignore you is not through willpower alone. It is by creating a life so full of purpose, growth, discipline, and self-respect that you no longer have the time or the desire to beg for attention from those who have already chosen not to give it. Because when your future becomes more important than someone's silence, you finally stop running after people and start walking toward the life you were meant to build. There comes a moment when everything changes. It isn't the moment the person who ignored you finally sends a message. It isn't the moment they apologize. And it isn't the moment they suddenly realize your worth. The real transformation happens much earlier. It happens the day you no longer need any of those things to feel complete. Because the greatest victory is not making someone regret losing you. The greatest victory is reaching a place where their validation is no longer necessary for your happiness. That is the highest level of psychological freedom, and very few people ever reach it. Most people believe they are chasing another person. But if you look closely, they are actually chasing a feeling, the feeling of being wanted, accepted, chosen, important. The other person simply becomes the source of that feeling. That is why rejection hurts so deeply. It feels as though your value disappeared the moment someone stopped choosing you, but your value never disappeared. Only your belief in it did. This is the trap that keeps millions of people emotionally exhausted. They spend years trying to convince one person to recognize what they should have recognized within themselves. Every ignored message feels personal. Every delayed reply feels like proof they are not enough. Every moment of silence becomes another reason to question their worth without realizing it. They have allowed another person's opinion to become stronger than their own. That is one of the most dangerous forms of emotional dependence, because the moment someone controls how you see yourself, they no longer need to control anything else. Imagine carrying a mirror everywhere you go, but instead of looking into it yourself, you hand it to other people. Every stranger decides whether you are attractive, whether you are intelligent, whether you deserve love, whether you matter. Would you ever truly feel confident? Of course not. Your identity would change every time a different person held the mirror. Yet this is exactly how many people live. They allow every ignored message, every cold response, every rejection to become another mirror deciding how valuable they are. Emotionally powerful people refuse to live this way, not because they think they are perfect, but because they understand one simple truth: self-worth cannot be borrowed. It must be built brick by brick through discipline, integrity, growth, and the promises you keep to yourself. The moment your confidence begins coming from your own actions, the opinions of people who ignored you become surprisingly quiet, not invisible, not painless, just smaller, because they are no longer deciding who you are. There is another psychological shift that changes everything. When you stop needing someone's validation, you also stop fearing their rejection. Fear disappears because dependency disappears. And without fear, you begin making healthier decisions. You stop chasing conversations that never go anywhere. You stop forcing relationships that only survive because of your effort. You stop explaining yourself to people who have already decided not to understand you. Instead, you simply observe. If someone values your presence, they will show it. If they don't, you peacefully continue forward, not because you stopped caring, but because you finally started caring about yourself just as much. This is what true emotional maturity looks like. It is calm. It is quiet. It does not announce itself. It simply refuses to beg for what should be given freely. Ironically, this is often the moment when people who once ignored you begin paying attention again. They notice your absence. They notice your confidence. They notice that your life no longer revolves around earning their approval, but something important has changed. And you are no longer waiting for that moment. You are no longer hoping they finally recognize your worth, because your peace no longer depends on what they choose, whether they return or never return. Your direction remains the same. That is real freedom. Remember, the purpose of stopping the chase was never to make someone come back. If that is still your goal, then you are still emotionally attached to the outcome. The real purpose is to free yourself from the exhausting habit of seeking validation from people who repeatedly showed they were unwilling to give it. That is where your power returns, not in controlling someone else's emotions, but in mastering your own. Life becomes lighter, your decisions become clearer, your relationships become healthier, because they are now built on mutual respect, not emotional dependence. In the end, the greatest lesson is not that people who ignore you will eventually regret it. Some will, some won't. That has never been the point. The real victory is waking up one day and realizing you no longer measure your worth by who chooses to stay or who chooses to leave. Because the moment you stop needing validation from those who ignored you, you stop chasing people forever and finally begin choosing yourself.